The end of history is one phrase that became very popular in the context of post-Cold War literature. The end of history refers to ultimate victory of liberal democracy and failure of the alternative that was offered to liberal democracy, that was communism. Okay. But how did this phrase become so famous? First of all, this phrase was first coined by Hegel. Hegel referred to progress of ideas through dialectical means, and then that would reach a final stage, and where there was no more progress of ideas and ideologies, because man has finally reached a position where there is nothing further to think about, which he called end of history. Okay. And this idea was taken by Marx, who said with the advent of communism, the end of history would come. And many communists were saying that communism would be the final form of the political system, and so at the end of history there would be communism. So those were the ideas associated with end of history. So it was in that context Francis Fukuyama made a speech in February 1989. At that time he was an expert on Soviet foreign policy working at Rand Corporation. And he said that history was going to end, and but it was not going to end with communism, but with liberal democracy. He made this speech in February 1989, when in December 1988 Gorbachev announced that he would not intervene in the affairs of the Eastern European countries. And surely Fukuyama predicted that if Gorbachev was not willing to intervene, then many things would change, and very soon East European countries fell, and Berlin Wall fell, and Fukuyama's predictions came out to be true. But after his speech in 1989, a magazine, at that time, a little known magazine called The National Interest, published the basic content of his speech with the title The End of History. And this was picked up by the mainstream, and the events so happened that the end of history theme seemed to be right. It means Fukuyama seemed to have guessed what would happen, and so the phrase became very popular. And he wrote a book, the title The End of History and the Last Man, published in 1992. That is after the collapse of the USSR. So this is the context of the phrase of end of history. Okay. Let us throw some light on the meaning of the end of history. See, some people think end of history means events ending. That it is not so. Events would continue. As Fukuyama said, this is not to say that there will no longer be events to fill the pages of foreign affairs, yearly summaries of international relations. For the victory of liberalism had occurred primarily in the realm of ideas or consciousness, and is yet incomplete in the real or material world. So, of course, he was saying that liberal democracy did not come at other places, but even if liberal democracy came at other places, it won't be end of history in the sense of ending the events, but it only means this: the state that emerges at the end of history is liberal insofar as it recognizes and protects through a system of law man's universal right to freedom, and democratic insofar as it exists only with the consent of the governed. So his point is that liberal democracy would emerge, and that is the last and final choice. So it is in that sense that is going to be end of history. But now we can, and then he made certain clarifications. For example, is it that everyone and continuously moving towards liberal democracy? Fukuyama said it need not be everyone. It is enough if major countries are doing it, and it need not be continuous. There can be backward movements. Okay. What he said, it would be a mistake to cite the failure of liberal democracy in any given country, or even an entire region of the world, as evidence of democracy's overall weakness. Cycles and discontinuities themselves are not incompatible with a history that is directional and universal. Just as the existence of business cycles does not negate the possibility of long-term economic growth. Which means, see, the business cycles exist like this. Economic growth continues, but then cyclical way. So growth is continuing, but so the same thing can be about democracy. There is a growth, but cyclical. And he also said, it matters very little what strange thoughts occur to people in Albania or Burkina Faso, for we are interested in what one could do in some sense call the common ideological heritage of mankind. That is, he is talking about majority of the population or common. So he is not betting that everyone at every place things would change, nor he was saying that things would move continuously without any backward movement. So he is making that statement with certain qualifications, because after all he is saying the end, talking about the end state. He is not saying that the movement should always be linear and continuous or everywhere. But now we can examine how far is this true. That is, how far is this march of liberal democracy. Okay, we are examining only the march of liberal democracy as an aspect of end of history, because end of history otherwise refers to many other things. It's a kind of a perfection. So we are not examining whether we have reached a perfection, and Fukuyama did not say that we have reached a perfection, but only in a context of major ideologies, he is saying liberal democracy is end of history, not in any other sense. Okay. And so this is not the way Hegel used, Marx used, and also the idea of last man came from Nietzsche. The idea of last man came from Nietzsche, and Fukuyama was not referring even to that. I mean, he was not referring to perfect state of Hegel, Marx or Nietzsche, but only triumph of liberal democracy as an ideology, nothing more than that. So we can examine whether liberal democracy has won, or is it progressive, or what is happening now. Okay. Here we have some empirical evidence, nothing to do with Fukuyama's work. This is done independently. There is empirical study by Przeworski and Limonzi, published in 1997. The things that they said seem to be supportive of liberal democracy. What is their thesis? They said, first of all, they linked to economy and liberal democracy. What the study shows is that we cannot say economic development leads to liberal democracy or liberal democracy leads to economic development. And liberal democracy can happen at any stage. But they said if liberal democracy happens in an economically advanced country, then it is going to stay. If liberal democracy happens in a developed country, it is going to stay. It means over a period of time, liberal democracies are going to be more in number because they are not going to fall. So that was the thing that they found out. This is what they said. They said, suppose the dictatorships are equally likely to die and democracies to emerge at any level of development. Suppose, even if the emergence of democracy is independent of the level of development, the chance that such a regime will survive is greater if it has been established in an affluent country. We would thus expect to observe democracies to appear randomly with regard to levels of development, but to die in the poorer countries and survive in the wealthier countries. Thus, history gradually accumulates wealthy democracies, since every time a dictatorship happens to die in an affluent country, democracy is there to stay. So it means as countries become more affluent, they are likely to be liberal democracies. And if an affluent country develops democracy, it is not going to go back. So these are the things. And what is the extent of affluence? They said the simple fact is that during the period under our scrutiny or ever before, or even before, no democracy ever fell, regardless of everything else, in a country with a per capita income higher than that of Argentina in 1975, $6,000. So they said once they changed the governments through free and fair elections few times and reached a certain level of economic development, they become consolidated democracies. And they become only game in town and can expect to last forever. So it is about affluent country tasting democracy, then it is going to remain democratic. It is not going to fall back. Okay. So then the theory predicts over a period of time, countries are going to be democratic. So this they said in 1997, and but then in recent years the news is not very happy about liberal democracies. What is happening? There is annual surveys done by Freedom House in this Freedom in the World survey. It is released every year. Larry Diamond in 2015 wrote that around 2006 the expansion of freedom and democracy in the world came to a prolonged halt. So democracy increased till 2006 and after that there is a decline. Okay. And then its 2019 edition says this is the 13th consecutive year of decline in global freedom. So there is no expansion of liberal democracy, but in fact there is a shrinkage. Okay. But of course, most of the data came from the countries that were not predicted to become consolidated democracies. Consolidated democracy means liberal democracies in affluent countries. Then they become consolidated. Of course, in consolidated democracies also, democracy is down. But in other cases, it is much worse. So how does one explain? First of all, Fukuyama said it is a cyclical phenomenon and it is not continuous. And one more thinker, Samuel P. Huntington, who was actually a teacher to Fukuyama, he proposed that democracy comes as a series of waves, each wave followed by a reverse wave. So democratic expansion follows democratic recession. So, going by Huntington's thesis, democracy was expanding till 2006 and now it has to go through expanding and it has to go through recession. Okay. Expansion and recession, and so we are in the stage of democratic recession. So it means that at the end of history there will be liberal democracy is not disproved. Though in recent years you can see liberal democracy one, and then affluence of authoritarian systems like China, okay, or even rise of Islam, okay, or populism leading to a liberal democracy. Curtailment of human rights in many countries. So, liberal democracy's expansion is facing a or liberal democracy's march is facing a bumpy road, or it is maybe going back. But it doesn't say in the end liberal democracy is not going to triumph, because this can be a temporary setback or is a part of cyclical process. What does Fukuyama think now? Fukuyama says in 2020, he says, I don't think they don't see any alternative way of organizing society that looks superior to liberal democracy. So he says liberal democracy will triumph in the end. Okay. And most of this article, particularly Empirical Evidence, is based on this particular article, The End of History, revisited by Yasha Monk, published in Journal of Democracy.